Good morning. We are here talking with Charlie Brennan of the Boulder Daily Camera. He's a reporter who did some coverage on the September 2013 floods. Today is August 20th, 2014. My name is Susan Barney Jones, and I am the interviewer. Charlie, we all start all of the tapes out with asking the person where and when you were born.
That's fine. I was born June 1st, 1955 in Philadelphia.
Can you tell me a little bit about your professional background, sort of your career path, and how you got to this place working at the camera?
Sure. I mean, very briefly, I studied music in college, but I always wanted to write. And when I was a young man, I sort of worked my way in through the back door at a small newspaper in Florida. And I worked in Hollywood, Florida for about 4 years, and then I was recruited by the Rocky Mountain News in Denver to come to Colorado, and I spent the first 4 years, from about '84 to '88, covering Boulder for the Rocky Mountain News, being based in Boulder, at which point I was transferred, promoted, if you will, down to the downtown Denver office, and I worked out of the Denver office of the Rocky Mountain News for the better part of the next 20 plus years. And I left the Rocky Mountain News in 2007, spent a couple years in TV, and worked for a couple different news websites in more recent years, and then joined the Daily Camera as what they call senior reporter, which I hope is not an allusion to my age, in November of 2012.
What are your responsibilities at the newspaper currently?
My portfolio, or mandate, if you will, is science and environmental reporter, but I also do some editing. I probably work about 25% of the time as an editor, and the rest of the time as a reporter. And I certainly don't do science and environmental writing exclusively. I've done a number of other things that have nothing to do with science or the environment. I've done a number of stories relating to the John Benet Ramsey case since I've been here, which is something that I was heavily involved with at the Rocky Mountain News. Plus, like any other reporter here, I end up doing all manner of reporting, but the emphasis is supposed to be on science and environment.
So I guess I want to take you back about a year ago to the evening of September 11th, when it had been raining quite a bit, and then overnight it got serious. Can you sort of describe what you were doing and how you started to get involved in the coverage of the flood?
Yes, I didn't do much that night except, like a lot. As is the case, I think, with a lot of people, the storm kind of snuck up on us in the sense that we didn't know we were going to be in it until we were really in it. And as you say, it was that Wednesday night, the 11th, that things got fairly intense. And I had worked a sort of a typical work day that day, and I don't even know what I wrote about that day, to be honest. And I went home at my usual time, early evening. And it wasn't long after that I started getting a number of alerts over my phone about flooding conditions, and also was seeing bulletins on the TV.
Where's your home?
Lafayette. And I called into the office and spoke to Elizabeth Clark, our night editor, and asked Elizabeth if she needed me to come back in. And she said, "Oh no, I think we're fine." Between herself, who Elizabeth has a good background as a reporter and also writing about science type things, and the reporter who was on that night, she felt that they were in good shape to deal with whatever was going on. And so I said, okay, and I hung up and I went back about my business, and I didn't pay much more attention to the flooding situation until I woke up the next morning and tuned into the TV and internet and saw what was going on. And I then came right into work, and I was the first reporter in the door at 7 a.m. on that Thursday.
Did you have anything in mind that you wanted to start, or were you just kind of wait for your editors to send you off somewhere?
Well, as the science and environment reporter, I felt that something that I really like about the way things work at the camera is reporters are given a lot of leeway to make their decisions about what is needed. And to a great extent, I think that works out because we have some very bright and talented people, and even a few of them who are very young. They're still smart, and I think that management here and the editors are smart enough to let smart, talented people make some, at least on the front end, make some decisions, and they'll always get guidance. So in that spirit, I just kind of, I figured as a science and environment guy, the logical story that I should be doing, and that I, was most curious to know about is what is going on in a meteorological sense. Why is the weather doing what it's doing? And so when I came in, the editor Matt Sebastian was here, and I told Matt that that's what I intended to do, and he said that's what I need you to do. And so I spent the day working from my desk, working the phones and working the web, and gathered as much information I could about the climate influences and the meteorological influences that were causing the storm that we were experiencing. And this may sort of forestall a number of other questions you might have, but for the duration of the flood, I never did a story that required me to leave my desk. I covered the whole flood with my telephone and the internet from my desk at the Rocky Mountain, at the Boulder Daily Camera.
So who were some of your contacts, people that you immediately got in touch with?
Well, we, at NOAA, we have, as part of NOAA, we have the National Weather Service right here in Boulder, and Nizette Rydell, the meteorologist in charge at the NWS office in Boulder, she was certainly somebody who I was in contact with on that day. Nizette, as it would happen, was not in Colorado that day. She was up in Wyoming on business, but she was still obviously tracking the situation here. Nizette Rydell at the National Weather Service, Bob Glancy at the National Weather Service, a veteran guy there. Those are two people who I was talking to a lot that day. Also, I will interject that as science and environmental reporter here, I was given that job not because I had any great experience in covering those topics. I was given that job because that's the vacancy that they had when they hired me. And so I didn't come in the door here in 2012 with a vast array of sources in this area. I've sort of had to develop them on the fly. And in that regard that day, or in that spirit that day, I made contact with, I don't think up to that point I'd ever talked to anybody, at least in recent years, at the U.S. Geological Survey. But I sussed out fairly quickly that the Geological Survey was the authority to go to on, specifically on flooding issues, because I thought it would be important to get an early determination, if possible, as to what magnitude flood we were dealing with. And so I made contact there with a man named Bob Kimbrough at the Denver offices of the U.S. Geological Survey, and he is also somebody I was talking to that day.
So what did you learn about the flood? The terminology is always one of the things that needs to be clarified. It's a record flood, it's a 100-year flood. What did you learn? That ends up kind of being one of the bigger parts of the flood story for me, because it was Bob Kimbrough at the U.S. Geological Survey who, at about 3:30 on Thursday, the 12th of September, told me that based on a gauge on Boulder Creek at North 75th Street, it was a 100-year flood.
And in that conversation, Bob was quick to point out that the Geological Survey no longer uses that terminology, and prefers, he says, what that means is that in any given year, a flood of this magnitude has a 1 in 100 chance of occurring. And it doesn't mean it could only happen once every 100 years. It could happen in consecutive years, but statistically, it's a flood that only has a 1 in 100 chance of occurring in any given year. And I said, and just to be clear, I said, I understand what you're saying, and am I right in understanding that it is what many lay people would still call a 100-year flood? And he said, yes. We don't phrase it that way, but yes, that's, we're talking about the same thing. And so so we got a story up on the web very quickly saying 100-year flood. And it's funny because probably within about 2 hours, our sister paper, one of our sister papers, the Longmont Times-Call, was reporting that in Longmont they had a 500-year flood. And so one of my editors, I forget which one, was at my desk a short time later saying, Longmont's got a 500-year flood, can we match, not can we match that, but gee, they're at 500, we're only at 100, what's the deal here? And I established pretty quickly that the Times-Call was basing that on a declaration by that city's director of emergency management, and whether he is a geologist or a hydrologist, or whether he was going on the authority of somebody who was a geologist or hydrologist or somebody with that expertise, or whether it was something he had pulled out of his hat, I don't know. But as I said to my editor, I said, I can't be responsible for what the Times-Call is reporting. All I can tell you is what my source is saying about our situation, and my source was Bob Kimbrough was standing by the 100-year comment. In subsequent days and weeks and months, people have challenged that statement, and it turns out that what was, I think, pretty well established within, probably by the end of the year, and certainly stands as the case today, is that it was a different magnitude flood on different waterways, and even at different points on the same waterway. It's these calculations that they make, whether something is a 1 in 100-year event or 1 in 500-year event, are based on readings, from the gauges in the streams. And in some cases, gauges were rendered inoperational or were washed away completely. And so in the ensuing weeks, we found that readings varied all over the map, and in some places there weren't readings per se. And scientists have had to go in and determine, sort of extrapolate from other evidence, what the peak flow might have been based on high water marks and other less scientific or less precise evidence, and they've had to kind of reconstruct and extrapolate. I know that on Boulder Creek at Broadway, the determination is that it was no more than a 50-year flood, and perhaps less. And some might say, well, how do you get to a 100-year flood at on the same creek at 75th when it's only 50-year flood or less at Broadway? And the answer is there are other tributaries and rivulets, small streams, creeks, what have you, feeding into Boulder Creek along the way, so you would have a different flow rate out at 75th Street than you would have at Broadway. So Bob Kimbrough has never come off his statement about the 100-year flood as measured at Boulder Creek on North 75th. I will say that he has said subsequently to that the gauge at Boulder Creek on 75th has only been in place since 1975, or thereabouts. And so it is not as if they have 100 years worth of readings from that gauge to be able to say with certainty that it's only a 1 in 100 year event. But based on the readings that they do have from that site since 1975, his statement was 100-year flood as measured at that point. I recently came upon a document from the Colorado Association of Stormwater and Floodplain Managers that plots out along the Front Range the different readings from up and down the Front Range, and they are literally, figuratively and literally, all over the map, ranging from 25-year flood up to plus or minus 500 year.
So I think when people hear that term,
Yeah.
they think, oh, we always have a big flood like this every 100 years.
Right.
And so we're due for our 100-year flood because it's almost been 100 years.
Right, right. And that's why the Geological Survey, among others, doesn't like that term, because it could happen again this year.
Right.
The subsequent reporting has shown that experts from various fields believe that the storm that we had in September 2013 was most similar to a storm that this area experienced in 1938. So that's 62. So that's like, that was 75 years ago.
Yeah.
So you know, that is, close to 100 years since we had one that they think this was most similar to.
Well, and I think the terminology also confuses people in the sense that what's being measured is actually the flow, and that's a rate that's been come up with, how often could we expect that kind of flow to happen? And,
Right.
And so I've noticed that the camera has recently been saying historic flood. Or,
Yeah. Yeah, because nobody can debate that.
Right.
There's no
Yeah.
question that this was a historic event. And you haven't asked me this yet, but I will also quickly throw out that the flood is one thing and the rain event is another thing. And there seems to be less debate and less controversy about what I think is even a more remarkable statement, that as far as a rain event, that this might have been a 1 in 1,000 year.
Can you describe what you mean by that, as
Just
the duration of it?
I think rather than the duration, it's the volume of rain that fell in certain areas in a short span of time. We had obviously, well, not obviously, but I mean, it's been reported many times, we had over 9 inches, I think 9.08 inches of rain here on the Wednesday, the 11th. We had at the official measuring spot for the Weather Service in Boulder, we had 17.15 inches in that week, and at a measuring site in southeast Boulder, it was actually over 18 inches in that period of time. And there are areas in the foothills where they think that the rain was falling, that even more rain came down. There's, much like the flood rate, there are measurements, there's rain measurements that vary up and down the northern part of the Front Range. And I think there's widespread agreement that in some locations, the volume of rain, the amount that came down in the period that it came down, was something that you would have a 1 in 1,000 chance of seeing in any given year.
Did you stay at the camera overnight? I know other reporters did. Or did you travel back and forth?
I traveled back and forth barely. The night that some people got trapped here was Thursday night, the 12th. And having come in at 7 that morning, I left to go home about 7:30 that night. I'd worked 12 hours straight. And I was actually the last to get out alive that night. And I only barely so. I started out, the flooding on Arapahoe in this area and some of these side streets here was very bad. And my normal way home is straight out Arapahoe to Lafayette. And it was closed westbound on Arapahoe from 55th, but it was a strange kind of closed in which people were driving on it anyway, because they only had barriers up on one side of it. And I made it to 75th Street, and at 75th and Arapahoe, there was no way I was going to get through there. Well, actually, I got through there, but then just past there, it was completely underwater, well up, almost to the top of my tires. So I turned around and I found another way home going north on 75th and out Valmont. So I got home, but the next person who tried to leave after I did, who had to get to Denver, had to turn back and come back and spend the night here. So I made it home that night. And then the following evening was also a challenge, but I got home. So Thursday night was the only night that it was touch and go whether I could go home, but I was able to. But yeah, a number of my colleagues who had worked later, they'd come in later that day and they worked later, they couldn't get out, and several of them slept right in this room.
So then did you come back in
Yeah.
the next day?
Yeah.
And how many days straight did you work from then on? Did you?
My normal work week is Tuesdays through Saturdays, and I worked Saturdays, I always do, and on Saturdays I always work exclusively as an editor, and I was editing on Saturday. Sunday is a regular day off for me, and I got the day off. I remember that day after the rain had let up considerably on the Saturday. It rained a lot more on the Sunday morning into the Sunday afternoon, and I thought I might well have to come into work, and I did check in with work, but they thought they were in decent shape, and I didn't need to come in. So I got in. My weekends are Sunday, Monday, and I got my weekend.
What was the atmosphere like in the newsroom?
Well, the two things I remember is, we always have, being in a newsroom, we always have a police scanner going, and it just, I have this memory of just one flash flood watch, one flash flood warning after another, after another, after another, and it almost seemed like and I was actually interviewed by the Weather Service for an assessment that the National Weather Service did on its performance during the flood. And I said to them, and they said that they had heard this from other people, that at some point the warnings and the watches almost seemed, I don't know about counterproductive, but they're overlapping. They were overlapping, and a new one would be issued before the last one had expired. And it got to the point where it's like, okay, I get it. It's like I don't know how useful it was, to get the latest warning on top of the latest watch on top of the latest warning, because it was just like, the bottom line was there was just water all over the place, and that wasn't going to change for a number of days. So I remembered that, and but the other thing I remember is our roof is not. At that time was not in very good shape at all, and we had a number of leaks coming into through the ceiling in the newsroom, and in fact right over my desk, a number of the sections of acoustic tiling or whatever it is had broken loose, and my desk was one of several in the newsroom where we had a trash basket on the desk to collect the water that was dripping down at a very robust pace. So those are the two things. Those are the two standout memories.
When did you finally get back out and see what really had happened? Up into the mountains. Did you get led in by anyone so that you could see the damage?
No. I mean, the Sunday of, at the conclusion of that weekend is the first day that I had off, and I had opportunity to really get out more around in my car and see a lot of areas that I hadn't seen yet. I did not get into the mountains for weeks. We had other reporters who got up there sooner than I did.
Well, and you probably saw the photographs, but I think when you finally get up there and see what had gone on the way up to Lyons and out up on the peak to peak and those things, did you get up and look later? I mean, covering that story, it seems.
Well, you know, it's interesting, and I bet I'm not the only person in this situation or in this position. I haven't been to Lyons yet. I've never seen Lyons since the storm, and I'm probably like some people in thinking that I want to I want to wait till they fix it. I know they fixed a lot of it. A place where I have gotten to several times, numerous times, is Jamestown. And I didn't get up to Jamestown until, must have been early November.
What did you see when you got up there? What was?
Oh, it was incredible. I mean, just you know, houses on their side, houses in creek beds, houses. Joey Hallett's home, specifically on Main Street. Joey Hallett being the Jamestown resident who was killed. The place completely shattered by the mudslide that came down the hill behind the house. It was really awesome, and obviously not in a good way. And I've been back to Jamestown numerous times, and they have done so much up there, and there's still so much to do. And you know, the really incredible statistic out of that really stays with me is that Jamestown had 300 people living there before the flood hit, and after the flood there were only 20 people who remained.
Is that still true, or are there more coming back?
No, as we talk now in August of 2014, they think about 150 of the 300 are back, and that's really. I mean, they can be proud of that, and an awful lot. It's taken an awful lot of work to get them to that point, because there was, you know, they lost most of their water distribution system. Roads washed out. Many of the homes obviously badly damaged, as I've already mentioned. And
how did you come in to town in November? How did you get up there?
Paul Aiken and I had to go up to Peak Highway and then come down. I think it's called the Overland Road, coming down from the west. Although when we were done that day, we were able to just come down James Canyon. I don't think we were supposed to necessarily, but news people don't always do what they're supposed to do.
That's why we like them.
Yeah.
Because I think right now it's still only closed to residents coming up the actual road, and you know, so that's a message to people about the damage. Have
Yeah.
you been following up on them as part of this anniversary special section? Yes, I have, and you know, I'm really impressed with the people they have up there. It takes a special breed, I've realized, to live in a community like that, because even when things are good, it's not necessarily easy. You know, I mean, it's like I'm sure, you know, we experience winter down here as a fairly benign and mild event for the most part, and just an average winter for them takes a little bit more, you know, spit and grit to get through than it does down here in the lowlands. And I think that, and you just find that it's there's a great spirit of resiliency and independence and self-reliance that I have perceived amongst those people, and I don't think it's an accident, or I don't think it's a coincidence. I mean, I think it takes a certain kind of person to settle in a community like that and to really make it work. And I think that if I had spent appreciable time up there before the flood, I think I would have sensed that as well. I don't think it's just a flood thing. Mm-hmm. I think it's the kind of people that kind of area attracts. And I think that the spirit and strength and resilience
of those folks has really served them well. And I will just say that, you know, as a journalist, I am so used to hearing people belittle and demean and disrespect their local officials. And in Jamestown, people are in love with the mayor, Tara Schodinger. And they are completely blown away by the leadership that she has shown in bringing that town back. A 60-some-year-old retired engineer who lives up there, Roger Loving was his name, said that the work that she has done has been remarkable, and he said I should add that that is a gross understatement. So, you know, I don't know if Tara Schodinger has aspirations in politics beyond Jamestown, but it does sound like she could easily be mayor for life up there if she would like to be.
Well, I think that's one of the advantages that a journalist has, is that you get in and kind of have the contact with some of these people that the rest of us don't know, and that you really get to know how they do their work and what they've been going through in a way that the average reader of the newspaper is not going to see.
Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about is that this is an ongoing story from a scientific standpoint. What are you seeing as things that need to continue to be followed up on and talked about in relation to the flood, even a year later?
Well, I mean, I would say for myself, and I alluded to this earlier, that while holding, you know, a title of science and environmental reporter, it is not an area that I have had a lot of expertise over the years. And so what I'm about to say is something that looms to me as a very intimidating topic, but the whole question of floodplain mapping, of establishing what are the danger zones, what are the 100-year flood vulnerable areas, and or greater than 100-year, whatever. The mapping of those areas upon which, you know, zoning regulations are based and building restrictions are based, I think it is a fluid, always subject to revision area that, particularly after the storm, a lot of people, it was found a lot of places flooded that were not within the 100-year floodplain.
Yeah.
And it taught engineers and hydrologists, I think many of them knew this already, but it was a reminder that that rivers are not static entities, that they're living, breathing entities which are subject to change and evolution, and where the stream bed is in 2013 is not necessarily where it's going to be in 2023. Storms can reshape the landscape, and the mapping of floodplains is, I realize it's something that is, it probably never stops if it's done properly, because it's informed by each event that comes along. And I think that those charged with mapping floodplains after this storm are particularly challenged to reassess, and I know that is ongoing. And I think there's a lot of interesting reporting that can be done and should be done in that area, and I hope I'm smart enough to do some of it.
If you look back on last September, are there any things that you would have done differently as far as the stories or the direction you took with them? And along with that, what kind of feedback did you get from readers about your work?
Yeah. As for anything I might have done differently, well, I mean, one thing I know I would have done differently is I would have utilized social media more, in terms of, I would have made more use of it in terms of tweeting stuff out to folks, and I would have done a better job of monitoring Twitter as a source from which to glean information. Being a journalist of a certain age and of a certain generation, I'm still not completely involved with Twitter as much as I should be, but it is a very valuable tool. And I know that emergency managers and meteorologists and people like that were making a lot of use of it during the storm, and it's a potential source that I didn't mine enough for information the way I could have and should have. So that's something I would have done differently. Maybe something else I would have done differently is when I called in to work upon getting home Wednesday night and said, do you need me to come in? When I was told, oh no, we're fine, maybe I should have said, well, I'm coming in anyway.
Well, no one knew, in a sense, except the people that were seeing the water come rising around their houses up in the mountains. None of the rest of us really knew.
Right, yeah. I mean, as far as feedback, we did something that was probably most, this is going to be boastful, but if you're not boastful in a historical document, you've missed your chance. So for posterity, I'll say that, well, I'll say two things. I'll say that there's a two-parter. For one thing, the camera can be very proud of the work that it did, because nobody out there, I don't think, realizes how few our resources are. We are a small newspaper with a small staff. And before an event like this, or I should say before this specific event, I had worried about how this paper would do if it ever got a really, really big news event. And I did not have faith that we could pull it off. Not because of the quality of people we have, but because of the number. The number is a very small number. And there was, something that you haven't mentioned, but that sticks in my mind from the whole experience is, in the first 24 hours, or maybe by the second day, the sheriff's department was saying that there are 20-some people unaccounted for. By the third day, that figure was up into 3 digits. And I believe by Friday or Saturday, they were saying that the number of unaccounted people was in the area of 300. I forget which side it was of 300. I know it was at least 250. And I remember thinking that if all those people are dead, or if even half of those people are dead, that is all this newspaper is going to be dealing with for the next year or beyond. I mean, I couldn't fathom how we, as a news organization, would deal with 250 of our citizens being dead in a flood. Yeah. I still don't know. I don't know how. I don't know how we would do that.
Well, thankfully, you didn't have to.
Oh my God! I mean, when it turned out, and I always knew when they were saying, okay, there's 250 unaccounted for, I always knew that a chunk of them were going to turn up okay. But I was thinking that if they're saying 250, it might end up being 100 dead. And I couldn't process how we would cope with that as a news organization. And the number ultimately in our county was 4. And for that, I am so grateful, as I know we all are. So I'm very proud of the camera for doing the job that it did through this event. And then a little bit of my own horn tooting. For any newspaper, the Sunday paper is the biggest deal of the week, and you try to sort of put your best foot forward on a Sunday. And Sunday of the flood week, we were still just very, very much in the middle of reporting on what was happening in the moment. The following Tuesday, Matt Sebastian said to me, okay, for this coming Sunday, we've got to do something. We've got to do something big on the flood, and I want you to do it. What's it going to be? And he and I brainstormed briefly because we have to do everything around here briefly. There's not a lot of we don't have enough staff to do anything like at length. Eventually, I think I just suggested, well, how about we just reconstruct sort of the week that was? And he said, great. But we didn't really get to there until late on that Tuesday. And because of production and editing and factors like that, it was going to have to be done by Friday. And it was going to have to be done by about midday Friday. And after about a half a day of working on it, I said something I always like having to say, but I said to Matt, I'm going to need help if we're going to pull this off. And he freed up my colleague John Aguilar, who has since gone on to the Denver Post, to give me some help. But John had other things going on, and he was also leaving that Thursday evening for a trip for which he already had a plane ticket. So I basically had about a day's worth of John Aguilar helping me on this, and by midday Friday, we had finished a 190-inch reconstruction of the week, and 190-inch to non-newspaper people probably doesn't mean anything, but I'll say like sort of a standard newspaper story might be 12 inches or something like that, and I just want to say that it was not easy. It was not easy, and I remember as late as that Friday morning. I was in here early on the Friday that it had to be finished, and I remember thinking, I'm going to have to go to Matt and say, I can't do it. You know, it's not. It was so trying to recapture that whole week in a story, and do it in effectively about 2.5 days, the reporting and the writing of it. I thought, throughout my whole career, I've periodically had the assignments that I thought, this is going to be the thing that I'm going to have to go back to my boss and say, it's bigger than me, I can't do it. And I remember that morning, that Friday morning, thinking, this is the one, this is the thing I can't do. But then I think not long after having that thought, something like clicked, and it started falling together, and we got it done. And I only sort of, tout that or toot my horn about that because I was really struck after the fact, after it was published. I had a lot of people say a lot of really kind things about what they thought of it. And
I think it was, remember reading it, and I think it helped just pull together. It was a really great idea to do it, brilliant idea to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it wasn't easy.
No, I can imagine not.
Not easy, but we pulled it off. And
people kind of craved that. I
Yeah.
mean, we wanted to know the story, just to be reminded, because even if we weren't physically affected in the same way that other people were, we knew it was happening to the community, and we wanted to remember it. I think it'll serve as a great document sitting there. I guess I also want to congratulate you. I agree that the camera did a great job. I think getting the paper out every day to people was really something.
Well, the record will reflect, and I don't know if Matt touched on this, but there was a morning that it didn't get delivered certainly in central Boulder. It never got delivered. It prints, I believe, in Denver. So every day of the week, it's, delivery of your daily camera starts with a drive up from Denver. And living out in Lafayette, I got it, but I think it was the Friday of the storm week.
I think that's right. And then because I live in Central, and we got it on Saturday, both papers or something like that. Right.
And, any newspaper, as long as we're still in the print age for however much longer, any paper prides itself in, getting it to the doorstep. And there was a morning that we couldn't, but it wasn't because we hadn't produced one. It was just the drivers of the trucks. They could get to East Boulder County, but they could not get into Boulder to deliver it. So, it's not on us; it's on them.
Well, I wonder if there's anything else you'd like to add. I think we've talked about a lot, and I really appreciate.
Well, you know, I'll just say one more thing that to me are really interesting. You know, with my science environmental writer hat on, I remember on the Friday before the storm, I wrote a short and sweet little weather story about how for the weekend we were looking at the possibility of record heat. And I remember talking to a meteorologist on the Friday afternoon. That would be Friday the 7th. Friday the 7th or the 6th? Friday the 6th.
Yeah.
Friday the 6th for the Saturday the 7th paper. And the meteorologist I talked to did not talk about record-breaking rain coming in the following week. I remember him saying that Saturday, Sunday would be the worst of the heat, and that Monday it would cool off, and there would be a better chance for showers the following week. And I just I when the storm set in, I kept thinking back to that conversation with that meteorologist that did not, you know, really he had not really indicated that we were in for anything like what we then experienced. And I think the Weather Service does a great job. And I know that we are in an area that is more difficult to forecast than some other parts of the country, but you know, they didn't see this one coming, and they've admitted it. I mean, they now insist. The Weather Service insists that by the weekend they were seeing a lot of moisture in the forecast, and they knew it was going to be a wet week. But even in saying that, they said there's no way we would ever see 9 inches of rain coming in one day. It's just, and I would cut them that slack. I mean, that's the
Well, and
word.
I also think if, in light of that, how few people lost their lives, and how remarkable it is that
Yep.
there vast destruction to property and that sort of thing, but
Yeah.
still.
Oh, it's a miracle.
Yeah.
It's a miracle.
Well, good. Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah.
Thanks for taking the time. And
Yep. Well, I think
Good
it's great work that you're doing, and obviously, journalists, historians are among journalists' best friends, because
Absolutely.
it's from documents like this that journalists and others in future years will have to depend on.
Well, good. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.